Hello gamers, I'm Ank and I have been obsessively playing Crimson Desert recently. In this time I have seen quite a bit of online discourse around this amazing game and I want to weigh in on this. When it released, the so-called critics were extremely harsh, nitpicking on anything and everything they could. And even when these problems were fixed, most still doubled down on their invalidated opinions. Maybe you heard about how ING, one of the most infamous gaming journalism sites, gave it a 6 out of 10. These are the so-called journalists that gave Dragon Age Felguard a 9 out of 10. I can only imagine that these people love licking windows in their spare time. Gamers, on the other hand, of course, had the exact opposite reaction, as we often have seen in recent years with most games that make the rounds on the internet. For the record, Dragon Age Felguard sold less copies in over 1 year and 5 months than Crimson Desert sold in the first 48 hours. Just a little piece of trivia right there to hopefully put in perspective the difference between these two games and how gamers reacted to them. Make no mistake, I'm not saying every single gamer out there will love this game, far from it, but the target audience of this game will absolutely adore it. It's clear for anyone with a brain that the critics have irrelevant and biased opinions that do not reflect the game, represent the gamers, or even have any grounds in reality. If it was only critics, I wouldn't even bother to talk about it, but behind these critics, or more specifically, on the same side as the critics, are Western developers, basically the Western gaming industry, and they are averse to this game and others like it. What I aim to answer in this video is the question, why? I have seen people throw a lot of reasons out there. The two most talked about ones are the developers not paying for positive reviews and the developers not appealing to Western sensitivities. You know, the progressive garbage that often talentless Western developers try to force feed the audience. While I believe these are valid reasons and definitely some of the reasons why we see this massive divide between the industry and us gamers, I also believe the main reason is much simpler, and sadly, I have not seen people talk about it. I believe the Western industry simply cannot recreate what Pearl Abyss has made here. It is simply beyond their capabilities on a technical level. When I say talentless Western developers, I do not mean it as an insult, it's just me stating facts, at least in recent years. I'm not saying all Western developers are like that, just that in most of these massive companies, they are. You have various people climbing up the corporate ladder through inclusion programs and other bullshit, and once they get high enough, they hire more people like them. That's how the cancer spreads, and those people that are not like them end up leaving. Anyway, back to the topic. Crimson Desert has literally hundreds of systems, and most of them come together like puzzle pieces. Of course, this ties into gameplay. As you discover and unlock more functionalities in this game, the more amazing the game ends up feeling. Making so many things work together seamlessly is extremely hard and takes very competent developers. Of course, that is not all. The world building, exceptionally massive, handcrafted, with an overwhelming amount of content, things basically happening everywhere and anywhere you look, and many other aspects. The game is not perfect. There are things that need to be improved. Gameplay-wise, for example, for the most part is extremely smooth. But I did notice a bit of friction in some instances, like for example when you try to aim your tools, like the mining drill. It feels delayed and clunky. But instances like this that create friction in gameplay are not the rule, only the exception. And who knows, maybe with time, those will be fixed as well. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is that technically speaking, this game is extremely complex and extremely hard to replicate, to the point where I would say it is impossible for the current Western developers to replicate. This is also the second time Pearl Abyss does this. They made Black Desert Online, which is a 12-year-old game. This is important because despite its old age, it still looks good and plays acceptable for today's standards. And whatever you might think of the game, it is known for having the best character creator in its genre and the best combat. to the point where nobody else is even trying to copy these exceptional elements. With Crimson Desert, by this game simply existing, it has raised the bar yet again, like many others before it that are also hated by the Western industry, which creates a very serious problem for Western developers. It is very hard to sell the audience on a worse product once they play and experience something so much better, especially when these companies that keep putting out banger games keep doing it with consistently smaller expenses. There are plenty of examples, but what comes to mind right now, and I think it fits, is an extremely similar game, Assassin's Creed Shadows, which cost at least twice as much to make, and you can check for yourself the difference in product quality. It feels like a bad joke, but it is very real. So these Western developers are left in a situation where they are unable to compete on product quality. Unlike in other cases, like with Battle Royales where Fortnite could easily copy the formula, or how League copied Dota, and many others, here simply they cannot do that, because sadly they do not have the competence required to put out a competitor. As a result, the industry is left with no other option than to do their best to smear games like Crimson Desert in any way possible, and towards the end of the video, I will also talk about these complaints that I have seen. This is not all there is to it, and if this was all, maybe the backlash would have been there, but not as bad as it is. But there's more. Pearl Abyss paid attention to feedback not from quality testers, not from critics, not the useless feedback from people that play the game for a few hours and move on, or do it as a job, but feedback from real gamers that bought and played their game, and more importantly, they acted in record time, every day patching and improving their game, not only fixing bugs, but actually implementing and improving systems based on player feedback, like adding additional storage that basically doubled the possible inventory space. And even though this was very well received by the community, some people, rightfully so, still said it's not enough, and a week later they expanded the storage yet again. Now the maximum storage capacity is 5 times larger than it was at release. This is just one example. There are a lot more, like improving the flight mechanic, adding permanent legendary mounts, and much more. I think you get the point. What all this shows is that it is possible for a company to collect feedback in real time and act on that feedback within days with solutions, rather than wait months or even years for solutions to be approved by various corporate structures. This creates another massive expectation from gamers. If there are problems, they should be fixed within reasonable time, maybe a few days, maybe a week, not years. So again, just like when it comes to quality, they need to make sure the audience does not get used to this as a new standard. Personally, I kind of expected this, because Pearl Abyss is the kind of company that has patches that are multiple pages long every single week, which is simply something that most of the gaming industry refuses to do. So if this becomes a standard in gaming, it would be devastating for all the major developers which simply are not able to do this. At the end of the day, games are a competition for the limited attention of gamers. So if they cannot compete when it comes to the product, they will try to eliminate that competition by whatever means necessary, which is exactly what they are trying whenever a new game that pushes the standards higher appears. They do not want the standards to be higher. They want easy money and for you and me to enjoy the same risking slop, maybe with some political lectures sprinkled in. In my opinion, these are the real reasons why they push so hard against Crimson Desert and against other games like this. And I wish more people talked about these things, so they would become standard practice in gaming, or at least a standard expectation. That being said, I mentioned earlier that I will also talk a little bit about the major complaints with Crimson Desert, which I mostly see as false narratives that have been pushed about the game. The first major complaint. These critics complained about how the game uses custom controls and how the systems in-game are not simplistic and brain-dead, and the fact that they actually had to use more than 2 brain cells to figure out a few puzzles. All these elements are obviously a major problem for someone that plays a game for a few hours and then moves on to the next game. For a reviewer, having to learn new controls and systems every game they play will be a major pain. It's not something they will be willing to do unless forced, especially when they have to review a different game every week. However, this is not a real problem for gamers. This is giving the game exceptional depth and complexity. It's actually a massive positive once we master both the controls and the systems, as it makes the game so much more enjoyable. I believe it is not a problem for most gamers if we have to spend a few hours learning new controls and new systems for a game that we are going to spend hundreds of hours in. These critics forgot that their reviews are meant to be for us, gamers, and not just to stroke the ego of other critics or of their corporate overlords. So I consider this complaint senseless and also pretty fucking condescending. Thinking gamers would have some major problem learning to use a few keys for specific actions, they are straight up calling gamers retarded, and this is so infuriating. Next, I have seen this complaint both from critics and even other gamers, and it's a complaint about the game having a terrible story. And I'm just baffled by this. The game has tens of narrative threads, progressing at all times and interwoven together. Most of the elements here are solid. The delivery is stellar, so is the voice acting. The cutscenes are good, and don't even get me started on the music and the sound quality. It's my subjective opinion at the end of the day, but so far the story has been good, or at the very least acceptable. There is a valid major complaint about this that I have seen from other gamers, and that is not having choices. However, when we think about this, we have to keep something in mind. You are not making a custom character. You are not playing as you, a character in this world. What you are here is an active observer of Cliff's story, not making your own. The choices are made by Cliff, you are just consuming his story. Both of these types can be enjoyable if they allow us to make our own character. Not having choices would have been absolutely terrible and would have made absolutely no sense. But if the developers are giving us a story with a pre-made character and a pre-made narrative, it equally makes no sense for us to make the choices. Personally, I would have preferred it if they allowed us to make our own character, thrown us in this world, and allow us to make our own choices and weave our own story. I do believe that would have been for the better and would have fit the kind of game Crimson Desert is much better. But what we got is the result of the developer's creative choice, and while it's not my preference, I can respect that choice. And honestly, at the end of the day, I have been enjoying Cliff's story so far, especially the narratives around the Greymanes. Anyway, the story is at the end of the day a subjective element, and everyone is entitled to their opinion. It's just annoying to see double standards and people praise some elements in one game and then complain about the very same elements in another game. Consistent logic is important. There have been even more complaints about various functional elements. However, most of those have become irrelevant as they have been already fixed. Also, considering the scope of the game, it has very few bugs. Personally, I only experienced one bugged quest, and that was fixed by the developers 2 days after I had a bug, so my subjective experience has been fantastic. However, I have seen it compared to Cyberpunk, which was literally unplayable before they fixed the game, and it is such an unfair comparison, it is incredibly disingenuous, so I wanted to mention it just to make aware those of you that haven't played the game yet. Anyway, that is it for this video. I wanted to weigh in on this conversation because I have not seen people actually discuss what I believe to be the real reason why the Western industry hates this game so much. And I strongly believe if we as gamers become more aware of these things, we can ask and even demand these higher standards from our games. Feel free to let me know if you see things differently in the comments, or even if you agree. Like and subscribe if you feel like it, or don't. See you in the next one, gamers.